I appreciate everybody coming in the room. I know there's a lot of crowds out there and there's a lot going on at the vendor booths. I was asked to do this panel kind of last minute, but I actually look forward to it because I'm not traveling all over the world. I actually only have to drive an hour and a half south from where I live. So I was more than eager to come down here. I'm Rob Kraczek. I'm a global strategist with One Identity. We're an identity security company. I've been with the firm for coming up on 14 years now, which is a long time in the IT world. I started out doing this stuff back in 1990 in the bad old days before the internet. It was called the DARPA net, Chuck. And I'm very happy to be here. And with me is, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, Antonio. I'm the founder and CEO of Zepo Intelligence. At Zepo, we're bridging the gap between human risk management and email security. So traditionally known as awareness and email security, it's just that it's no longer about email, right? It's about platform and the collaboration ecosystem getting more and more complex. So we're a company based out of, we have offices globally out of Madrid, New York, Mexico, and Israel. And we're very happy to be here today.
So Chuck Grindle, I am the executive advisor at Proofpoint. Obviously, Proofpoint does human-centric cybersecurity, if you're aware of the company. My background is I spent nearly 30 years in the military. How many veterans out there? How many? Thank you. Rob. And Robert. And then, so after blowing stuff up for the first part of my career, I decided to get smart and do something that had a career afterwards. So I moved into IT with the military. After the military, I did about 4 years with Governor Bevin in Kentucky. So just one of our previous speakers spent some time in the state government, then joined AWS in a like type role, and then moved on to Proofpoint. Implemented Proofpoint in Kentucky, so near and dear to my heart what we do. So appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thanks guys. So what I thought I'd do today is I'd open up with some scenarios and just we could have a conversation about it between us. We're missing our lawyer, so we'll avoid the legal questions that I had prepared, unless anybody in the...
Lawyers? Any lawyers in the room? Come on, raise your hand.
I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
Did you?
So that
in some parts of Miami, that's just fine.
Do you have chat GPT?
Yeah. So Tuesday morning, an employee gets a Slack message from what looks like IT. They click on a familiar link, they enter their credentials. 4 minutes later, an attacker has the permanent session token, and we've seen this in the field. MFA is bypassed, and by Friday, payroll is gone. The security team finds out Monday. Pretty common scenario, unfortunately, in our business. Chuck, your platform sees billions of threats daily. How did that message get through, and where did the attack become inevitable?
First off, they must not have Proofpoint, right? Because if so, our collaboration suite would take care of that. But we do look at billions of emails every day, and we have an LLM that allows us to be able to use that data across the platform. And so when you look at the human centricity of that attack and the conversation, you got multiple channels coming into the organization right now that are impacting your people. As an example, when I was in Kentucky, we used Slack, we used Teams, we were using Zoom. So you got these multiple channels that are affecting people and going after your most vulnerable asset, which is your people. And so essentially, that coming in, the individual, they're busy, right? It might have been Joey or Susie came in the morning, they look at that coming in, and they say to themselves, hey, it's fine, I can go ahead and click on it. Because they're focusing on a channel that is expected to be safe from them. And so from that point then, they then have an opening. Once they have that opening and they allow that user to click, and there was nothing to check that link, that human in the loop to make sure that was valid, then they're off to the races. And then at that point, it's really just a matter of time in order for them to get the credentials that they need. So that becomes the challenge.
That's right. Once you're compromised, then you just land and expand. Antonio, no technical controls stop that employee. What does your platform see in that human moment that everybody else is blind to?
So the first thing is this is no longer science fiction, right? I think it was end of 24 or beginning of 25 that we went through that situation in particular, with the exception that it was not just Monday. It was actually months after that the clients noticed that they were going through that particular issue. So up until that moment, what we had been doing with that particular client is enforcing training in other platforms that go beyond email. Because when we were born as a company, we were convinced about how social engineering is getting more and more complex and human vulnerabilities can be exploited in multiple platforms. And in the end, it's about where employees spend time and how in those areas where they spend time, those vulnerabilities are going to be exploited. And we knew that Microsoft Teams or Slack were going to be among those where these risks could take place. So we had been training that organization with some specific context and simulation threats under control setups, particularly in Slack, so that employees could understand and could read a challenge when, or a peril when that would pop up, right? So on the one end, what we do is, what we believe organizations would benefit from is actually for empowering their employees, their human assets, with those situations in which the risk can really take place. But with this particular client, he basically encouraged us to say, okay, this particular time the employee couldn't identify the risk, what can we do next? And we just noticed something that we're seeing more and more nowadays, which is technology is getting so complex and so quick that employees are no longer capable of identifying all threats. So we are starting building technology pretty much as our colleagues at Proofpoint do to identify those threats in real time, like leveraging deep tech technology, so that now when employees are sharing something in one of those communication channels, Slack, Teams, Salesforce, whatever, so an alert can pop up and we can let the organization know that something is going wrong as well as the user. So in summary, I think it is our responsibility to continue training and empowering, or to continue training employees in those setups where those new risks can take place, but at the same time to empower them with the resources and technology to strengthen their capabilities of identify those risks, as technology is outpacing human detection. So we need technology to be there.
Yeah, those are both great responses. And since we don't have our hack lawyer with us, I'll add a little color to that. So I work on the identity governance side of things. So I work in the PAM and the IGA space and access management. So what they're describing is the human component of the breach model. Is anybody from Okta here? No? Good. So they had a breach, what was it, 2 years ago, and that was caused by a permanent session token from a contractor. So the contractor had a permanent session token on their desktop. They used their personal browser to look at they opened a phishing email with their personal browser. The hacker was able to get into the desktop, find the permanent session token, and then slipstream themselves into the support system for Okta. And then they downloaded a client list. So what they just described is the training and detection models that you would probably expose that contractor to before you would onboard them with your systems, so that they're aware of best practices. And then from my side of things, you would probably put really heavy-duty guardrails in your access management and IGA tool to make sure that they didn't have their own personal browser on that machine in the first place. So the next question I have is about machines and APIs. Most organizations have hundreds of non-human identities. It's a hot topic right now. How many of you have not heard about non-human identities? It's everywhere. I just did 2 webinars this week on it. Service accounts, API keys, AI agents, that no single team fully owns. Yet we govern human identities with rigorous processes and largely ignore the machines operating alongside them. Antonio, attackers increasingly manipulate humans to get to machine identities. Social engineering a developer and exposing an API key, does that make NHI security fundamentally a human problem? Is it a training issue, a detection issue? Is it a human issue?
Coming from where I come, it's tempting to say yes, but the reality is not, right? It would be like too simplistic. Absolutely, I think everybody would agree that social engineering is a major entry point, but it's not the only one, right? I think NHI is fundamentally a human problem. It's not fundamentally a human problem, but rather a systemic one. As we see, and I like to clarify just to make sure we're on the same page, right? So when we speak about, or we talk about non-human identity, we're speaking, it's like technology credentials or login credentials, right? So it's no longer about taking care of humans, it's just taking care about how machines start talking to each other. And the truth is that even though it's a systemic problem and it's not just a human problem, there is a layer that intersects with humans, right? And we need to take care of that part. But the truth is that as technology gets more and more complex, as the collaboration ecosystem gets flooded with new tools, with new tokens, with new APIs, with third-party supply vendors like providing you, we need to move at a faster speed in catching up with the challenges that the industry on that end is posing, right? So even though it is not a human problem, I think connecting identity security with human signals at the point where decisions are made, it is very relevant, right? So I feel like we are coming from an era in which, as an industry, we're being obsessed with protecting our infrastructure. Now we have moved into protecting our data, cloud identity, and we're moving into an era in which it'll be all about protecting our decisions. Think about us in our personal lives, right? How many of us are engaging with cloud or similar technologies and engaging with our Gmail accounts, our personal accounts? We are basically letting them do things on our behalf. And on the back end, they're just machines talking to each other. And it's no longer about storing data. It's about taking actions.
That's right.
So it is not a human problem. I think it is a systemic one. But definitely the human layer interacts at different angles throughout the process, and therefore it needs to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, it's a great response, and I agree with all those points. So Chuck, these identities don't manage themselves. Humans create them, they own them, and to forget about them. Guilty, I've done it. What does that accountability gap look like from where you sit?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'd go back to my time in Kentucky. We had 6 single sign-on frameworks and 4 identity management engines running about 2,400 applications. And that was stuff that we controlled on-premise. And during that time frame, we had this movement that was to be to the cloud. And so you say to yourself, what are you going to do with all these different credentials that you have out there? And so you have to really, what we did was take a look at the identity plane. What were we going to use to authenticate? And a lot of times we looked at identity not being an individual, but being essentially an access point or an API to another piece of technology. So you're really moving that identity plane from a human being to now a credential or an account that now has access to something else. And so you've entrusted that connection is going to be secured and maintained. And while you may be, if you have just 1 or 2 applications, very comfortable with that, I can tell you moving that into multiple 33,000 employees that potentially have the ability to create those connections to individual applications was somewhat causes you to have gray hair. Not that I have gray hair or anything, but it shifts that control plane to something else. And so then you have to say to yourself, how do you ensure that the data that's being shared is the right amount of data? So how do you look at those API connections and make sure that what's being transmitted, HIPAA, FERPA, CGIS, IRS 1075 data across that plane, making sure that communication is good? And so putting the human back in the loop, agentic AI, right? Being able to look at that and say, okay, the person over here loaded a document and it says Charles Edward Grindle, but it forgot the junior or the senior, and it uploads a document over to an HHS system. How does it put the human back in the loop to say, hey, that content shouldn't be over here? The ability for you to inspect has to be part of your environment. to know that those API connections are true to form and making sure that connection and the data that's being transmitted, to your point about data, is being well received in the right data. If not, put a human in the loop, let them put a set of eyes on it, make sure it's good.
Yeah, I think they both hit on great points. From where I sit, two things. Accountability, there should be an ownership chain at all times around any non-human identity environment. And you should also be you should be ranking your identities by risk. So from human, AI, API calls, OAuth tokens, all the way down to service accounts, rank them by risk, not by role, because some will be riskier than others. And that's, I think, how we're going to mitigate a lot of those issues, in my opinion. It's another question. The average enterprise now has hundreds of SaaS applications, each with third-party integrations. OAuth tokens, vendor access that nobody fully inventories. Identity governance was hard enough when it was just employees, right? Chuck, from the threat intelligence side, are third-party SaaS integrations now a primary threat vector? And what does good vendor access governance actually look like in practice?
Yeah, I think it's really a management of that vendor access, right? Who has access to what? Who has authority to do what within your environments? Maintaining that list, validating applications, making sure that you are at least in somewhat frequent communication with the vendor to find out where they are in their platform. Are they doing some type of an inspection of their own platform? Partners out there, they're a partner for a reason, right? Not necessarily vendors, but partners. They're a partner because they're communicating with you how they're keeping their platform up to date and whether it's secure and how they're doing that. Vendor relations was a whole office that I have within my organization. And the ones that were partners were expected to come in and discuss with us things like quarterly briefings. Here's what we have done for you. Here's what we are doing for you on our platform to ensure that you're secure. Those communications are happening. That two-letter word right now, AI, right? We can't go out there without it. Have you received a statement from them on how they are using AI within their environment? And then how they're using your data, if they have access to your data. I think those are really important points for you to make sure that you are having that conversation. And there's no right conversation, but if you're not having that conversation, I think there becomes a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, Antonio, collaboration tools, AI productivity apps that Chuck just talked about, automation platforms, are these the new shadow IT? And is this the security industry keeping pace with how fast they're being adopted? Is it?
I don't know if it is shadow IT, but it's definitely shadow IT infrastructure. I think what has changed isn't just that teams are adopting new or more tools, right? It's just that every tool now comes with OAuth grants, tokens, third-party APIs, machine-to-machine access. So I feel like instead of unknown apps, is unknown access to paths of several paths into your core systems. And that's actually very dangerous. So to your second point of the question, which is related to the first one in terms of the pace, I don't think I don't think the industry is moving at the right pace. And one of the reasons why I think this is taking place is just, of course, technology is moving fast, which is nothing new, but the truth is that security programs are built around something different, right, when it comes to identity. With identity, we used to manage employee identity, and we were governing access at the login with periodic reviews, etc. But the systems now work differently, and I want to illustrate that again with the example that I was giving before, right? So for a personal task that I've been carried out lately, I was giving access to Claude to some of my personal staff. And the access is granted once. So I didn't want to give Claude access just for once. So every single action, every single task that Claude was performing and was accessing my system, Claude was asking for my credentials like authorization. But at some point, because it was every 2 seconds I was saying, okay, yes. And at some points, I did what's going on in the organization, which is access is granted once and persists there on the back end. So integrations are now built on behalf of users who don't have visibility at all. And that's why I do believe, and looking at, if we learn as humans, if we look at our history and what happens in other technology revolutions or industrial revolutions, like this is going to happen, and it's going to happen fast. So I think we better change our mindset and understand and feel comfortable with the fact that this is going to be running on the back end, that we don't know what's going to be happening, and that therefore we need to move from protecting data to protect our decisions. And I think this is like the big change, right? Because the way this is moving, I feel like it's unstoppable.
Yeah, that's a great point. I don't know how many of you came up in the days when NT domains and Active Directory were brand new, and we dealt with group policy objects. And at some point when you're installing a piece of software, you just say, fine, admin privileges, right? Just give me administrator, I'm done.
It's easy.
It's the same thing we're doing with AI now. We're like, fine, just have access, right? It's an issue because we want things to be easy, and AI makes information so easy to process, but also giving it too much access without guardrails can be a real concern. Now, interestingly enough, I did have a question for our missing lawyer that I thought I would leave as an open-ended question for the audience. I was going to ask him, when a third-party vendor is breached and your data is exposed through an integration you approved, your organization did, not maybe you personally, what does accountability look like? And we're not going to answer that here, but I'd like you to ponder that because that's something we all have to deal with in our organizations. Who's accountable when there's a breach? And how do you chase that process chain to make sure that you're protected and potentially your customer or client's data as well? I was joking with somebody in the audience or the back room earlier today about I have a stack of letters of people who said, oh, sorry, I lost your stuff, right? At what point do you get desensitized to it, and are you now legally exposed? So we're getting close. I think we might be a little bit over, but I want to ask this final question. One sentence answer. Let's start with Antonio. The identity security investment most organizations in this room need to be making right now.
It's a tough one. So I would say don't invest into another identity control tool. I would invest in layers that breach all dimensions. I would invest in breaching that human behavior with that identity context. And finally, the place where those decisions are made. Those decisions are still made nowadays in email. Then connect to email security. But tomorrow, today actually, those decisions are being made in other places. Slack, Teams, we name those here. But also Salesforce, Asana, ClickUp. There's so many tools where your colleagues are making calls, are making decisions. That is our responsibility to build that layer that breaches those three areas, right? The identity context, the human layer, and where the decisions are made.
I would say insider threat detection and response. From a human-centric perspective, you have to know if somebody is inside your wire and have the ability to detect it. From that standpoint, we're closing off the outside world, but we've got to know whether somebody's inside and has access and moving laterally.
And I'll close it out and say, from my perspective, invest in your people and process. Understand what you have in place already and what you could be using better to address the overall issue. ITDR gives you great risk signals at a real time. How can you take action on those? And then understanding the depth of your threat and where it is. It's partially ITDR, partially process, partially training and people. And with that, I have no other questions, and I think we're at the top of the hour. Thank you very much.